Just days after Pope Francis's death, his sister Maria Elena broke her silence. What she said has left even the most devoted Catholics speechless. She talked about emotional memories, hidden truths, and a side of Pope Francis that no one knew about until now. As tributes came in from all over the world after his death, many people thought they knew everything there was to know about the beloved leader of the Catholic Church. But then out of the blue, his sister Maria Elena spoke out. Bergoglio spoke out. For years she kept quiet, rarely talking to the media and keeping her private thoughts out of the public eye. But her brother's death made her speak, and what she said wasn't just touching, it was emotional, revealing, and in some ways controversial. In this video we'll look at everything Maria Elena said, including details about her brother's last days, personal regrets, untold stories from their childhood in Argentina, and the pressure she felt to speak out. We will talk about how the church and the public reacted to her emotional tribute, as well as why her words are causing so much debate around the world. Stay tuned, because as we go deeper, you'll hear some shocking truths about Pope Francis that will challenge the perfect image many have had of him for years. Trust me, what Maria Elena said near the end of her speech made everyone stop and listen. Let's begin. For more than a decade, Maria Elena Bergoglio was the only surviving sibling. Maria Elena chose to live a quiet life away from the public eye, while her brother Jorge Mario became one of the most famous religious figures in the world. She stayed in Argentina, rarely giving interviews, and never tried to make money off of her brother's fame. But after the Pope died at age 88, something changed inside her. She released a statement that wasn't planned by Vatican officials or filtered through church media. It was raw, honest, and deeply moving. In her first public comments since his death, Maria Elena said, "He wasn't just the Pope to me, he was Jorge, my brother, the boy who chased dogs in the yard, who made me laugh when I was sick, and who cried the night our father died." She then shocked reporters by saying, "I never wanted him to become Pope. It cost us more than the world will ever know." That sentence alone raised a lot of eyebrows. What did she mean? How much had it cost them? Why hadn't she said this before? In the days that followed, journalists and loyal fans alike started to dig deeper. What else had Maria Elena been hiding all these years? Why now, of all times, did she choose to speak? But that wasn't the end. What she said next made headlines all over the world. It wasn't about church politics or theology, it was about family sacrifice and a truth that may challenge millions of people admired. Stay with me, because what's coming next will change everything you thought you knew about Pope Francis. Maria Elena wasn't just talking out of grief, she was talking from memory. As she went on, the world got a rare look behind the curtain of Vatican protocol and into the childhood of the man who would become Pope Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Before he wore the white cassock, he was a curious and introspective boy growing up in Buenos Aires. Maria described him as quiet but fiercely. She remembered that even as a child, he carried a weight that seemed bigger than himself. But what most people don't know is that before the church, there was someone else who shaped his soul. She talked about their religious grandmother Rosa, who had strong morals and even stronger opinions. According to Maria, Rosa lit a spiritual fire in Jorge that burned for justice, compassion, and penance. But this is where things took an unexpected turn. In a surprising turn, Maria admitted that they had been through a lot as kids. "There was an event in our family that broke us all apart. It wasn't a betrayal of faith, but of blood, and Jorge took it the hardest," she said. What exactly was this betrayal? According to Maria, it had to do with their father and a secret second family that had been kept secret for decades. She didn't name names, but she did say that Jorge found out about this when he was 12 years old, and from that point on, his innocence was taken away. He became obsessed with rightness. Maybe in the craziest part is that Maria said Jorge's decision to become a priest was heavily influenced by this hidden family dynamic. He didn't run to God because he felt called, he ran because he was trying to escape the shame, she said solemnly. This shocking revelation shocked both longtime Catholic followers and people who were familiar with the religion. Suddenly, the idea of Pope Francis as a man of humility and self-sacrifice took on a whole new meaning. What if his humility wasn't just a virtue but also a form of personal? A lot of people were upset by Maria's words, both because they were mean to the man, and because they made people think about the heavy things he must have been carrying while being head of the Catholic Church. Just when people thought they had heard the most shocking part, Maria hinted at something else that the Church would rather she never talk about. What was it? Keep watching because the next part shows the secret Vatican file Maria says her brother kept secret until his death. Maria Elena's first wave of revelations shocked the faithful and made many ask hard questions. She sat down for one last interview, one she didn't want to give. Her voice shook not from emotion, but from the weight of responsibility. She said she had thought for years about whether to talk about this next part, because it wasn't just about her death. It was about secrets kept in the highest levels of the Vatican that Pope Francis took with him to the grave. You must understand, she began slowly. Jorge thought there were things the world wasn't ready to know, not because they were bad, but because they could destroy everything people believed in. Maria said her brother had put together a private collection of letters, documents, and recordings, while he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires and then Pope. This collection was known as Al Dozia, inside the Vatican. Nasosto's secret file was never made public, and not even his closest advisors knew everything that was in it, she said. But how did she know? Maria said that during his last trip to Argentina before becoming Pope, Quad gave her a handwritten letter and a key to a private safe that was kept in a hidden archive below Vatican City. In the letter he wrote in a vague way, "If anything happens to me and the world starts asking why I kept quiet on certain things, tell them to look beyond the gold and marble, tell them." And this is where the story gets scary. Maria never used the key. Because she respected her brother's wishes, she kept the letter sealed until the morning he died. When she opened it, she found something shocking, Jorge's own handwriting, in which he admitted to finding something that rocked his faith to its core, a web of financial corruption, high-level abuse cover-ups, and secret dealings between the Vatican and authoritarian. He didn't name names in that letter, Maria explained, but he left enough clues to show that he was torn between his duty as a moral leader and his fear of destroying the Church. What makes this story even scarier is that Pope Francis reportedly chose silence over exposure. This wasn't because he was involved, but because he thought the Church couldn't handle another global scandal. He made the smart choice to reform slowly and quietly from the inside, but Maria Jorge said he regretted that choice and in his last years he thought that the Church might need to be completely broken down before it could be rebuilt honestly. He once told me that she whispered, "Maybe I was too soft, maybe I should have been the Pope who ended the lies instead of protecting them." This is where things get even scarier. Maria told me that in the weeks before his death, Jorge tried to get those files released after he died, but something or someone got in the way. The file, she says, has since disappeared from where it was stored, but Vatican officials deny no one will admit it exists, but Maria is sure they know it's there, and are scared of what's in it. The biggest question now is what was so dangerous in that file that even the Pope was afraid to release it. The answer might be in what Maria says next, a revelation not only about church politics, but also about a moral failure Jorge thought would be his worst sin. Stay tuned, we're about to talk about a promise Pope Francis made on his deathbed, and why his sister thinks As everyone watched the solemn procession of Pope Francis's funeral, not many people knew that just days before he died, he whispered something to his sister Maria Elena, in the quiet, dim light of his private quarters that left her shaking. According to her, his last hours weren't just spent in prayer or reflection, they were filled with urgency. He had one last mission to complete, one last truth he needed to make sure didn't die with him. Maria leaned in close and told him, "You've done everything you could, and carried more than anyone should have. Let it go now." But Jorge, who looked weak and frail, grabbed her hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll tell them about the children as well as the dossier." "What kids?" "The ones who were never counted, the ones the Church failed, the ones I couldn't save." Maria was confused, but Jorge, whose voice was barely audible, said it. She says it was the most vulnerable moment she had ever seen her brother show. He was the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church around the world, but he looked more like a burdened priest than a powerful pontiff. Maria called it the final breaking of his spirit, and he was talking about something deeply buried. According to Maria, Jorge had spent years trying to bring to light what he called the quiet tragedies. These were cases of abuse and neglect that were never recorded or brought to light because they happened in poor missions or parts of the world that the church thought were too unstable for them to get involved. Many of the victims were children from developing countries. Jorge thought they had been forgotten, not only by the world but also by the church that was supposed to protect them. He told me that Maria told about cases where bishops were told to hide bribes, paid to silence witnesses and priests, who were moved without being held responsible. Jorge tried to reopen some of these cases, but each time he ran into opposition from both inside the Vatican and from local dioceses who were afraid of scandal more than justice. And here's the saddest part, Jorge blamed himself. He said, "I wanted to protect the faith, but I ended up protecting the system." That the church's bureaucracy had become its own form of sin, an institution so focused on self-preservation that it had forgotten its true purpose of mercy, justice, and truth. Then, with what little strength he still had, he gave Maria a small wooden rosary. It wasn't valuable, it wasn't made of gold or jewels, it was just plain old wood, but it had a story. He told me it belonged to a boy in Argentina who tried to get help from the church but was turned away. The boy killed himself a week later. I've carried this rosary for I wore that rosary for decades, to remind myself of the price of silence. Now Maria says it represents her brother's hidden pain, and the reason she is breaking her silence. So why is the Vatican not recognizing these claims? Why is there no official statement about this deathbed promise? Maria says it's because if the world starts digging into those unofficial files and buried cases, the damage would be permanent. She thinks there are people inside the Vatican who want to keep Jorge's legacy alive. A reform-minded pope who did his best, but Jorge himself wanted the whole truth to be known, even if it hurt the image they were trying to protect. Now Maria says she has to decide whether to honor the church's silence or her brother's truth. What she does next could shock the Catholic world, but what she hinted at next might be the most shocking thing she's ever said. Who is supposed to replace Pope Francis in the deal he allegedly made before Jorge's death? As the bells tolled in Vatican City, and white smoke rose again, marking the start of a new era, few people outside the inner circle knew what had already been planned behind the scenes. According to Maria Elena Bergoglio, Pope Francis's only living sibling, her brother had been worried about his successor for a long time, not because of differences in doctrine, but because of someone made a secret deal while Francis was still alive, and Jorge told them in one of their last conversations, they've already chosen him. He also promised them silence, which made Maria wonder who they were, and what kind of silence the new pope owed them. That's when Jorge told her the name of the person, Cardinal Matteo Teresco, a rising star in the Roman Curia, known for his charisma, eloquence and political savvy. But beneath the polished image, according to Maria, Jorge was suspicious of something much more dangerous. He had found letters that showed Teresco had privately promised some of the most powerful groups in the Vatican that if he ever became pope, he would not look into the so-called unopened files, especially those involving abuse cases from the late 1990s to the early 2000s in South America, parts of Africa, and Eastern Europe. These were the very cases Pope Francis had tried to bring to light, and Jorge told me, they want history to forget what happened, but if Teresco becomes pope, they won't just forget, they'll erase. Maria didn't want to believe it because the church had been under a lot of public scrutiny for decades because of abuse scandals. Why would anyone want to hide more truths, especially now? But Jorge insisted that the Vatican was still deeply divided. There were people who truly believed that Teresco would erase all records, people who wanted reform, and people who wanted stability at all costs, saw reopening old wounds as a threat to not only their reputations, but also the church's authority. And here's what's even scarier. Maria says that soon after Jorge's health started to get worse, she noticed a change in his schedule, fewer public appearances, fewer off-the-record interviews with investigative reporters, and most importantly, fewer mentions of accountability. At first she thought it was just fatigue, but then she found out that several of Jorge's closest advisors were quietly moved or fired, and some were replaced by people loyal to Cardinal Teresco.
One unnamed source in the Vatican said there were even rumors that Jorge's upcoming apostolic letter, which was supposed to demand full disclosure of the Church's historical abuse archives, was put on hold just weeks before he died because of pressure. Nuria says that letter could have changed everything, but it might never see the light of day. Some people have been bold enough to say that Pope Francis was outsmarted in his last days, that the institution he led moved farther away from the values he once fought for, and that his successor may not have been chosen because of his faith, but because he was willing to keep the silence Jorge wanted to break. And here's the craziest part. Nuria says she was warned. I received an anonymous letter that said, "Be careful what you say, your brother died." But Nuria says she can't keep quiet, even though she knows that Jorge's last wishes may have been buried under layers of Vatican protocol and political gamesmanship. For her, telling the truth isn't about scandal anymore, it's about leaving a legacy. The question now is whether she will release the documents or letters Jorge left behind, because he didn't just tell her things, he left her proof. In a modest way he did this. A wooden chest hidden in Maria Elena Bergoglio's quiet Buenos Aires home holds what might be the most explosive collection of handwritten pages in modern church history, Pope Francis's private journal. According to Maria, these journals cover the last 2 years of Jorge's life and are full of honest thoughts, coded warnings, and cryptic references to people and events that have never been made public. What makes this journal so important isn't just that it was written by the Pope, it's what he chose to write in it. When Jorge knew his time was running out, he started writing in a journal every day. This started soon after a serious health scare that sent him to the hospital in 2023. Nuria remembers a phone call where he told her, "I don't know how much longer they'll let me speak freely, but my hand still works, and I will write what my voice can't say anymore." What he wrote shocked even her. One of the first entries says, "The wolves are circling. My silence is no longer peace, it is fear disguised as obedience." From that point on, the journal reads like a slow fall into both physical and spiritual resistance. Jorge writes about meetings with high-ranking cardinals who, according to his notes, told him not to talk about abuse that happened in the past. As a child, Jorge was told to keep quiet and guard the church's unity, instead of going after justice. But Jorge was never one to do that. When weak people were involved, one entry that stands out is especially disturbing. To protect the institution by denying the truth is to crucify Christ again. I have seen the eyes of victims and heard their stories, and yet I'm told to be diplomatic, but I wasn't made Pope to keep secrets, I was made Pope to serve God. Nuria says that her brother never meant for these words to be kept secret. In one of their last conversations, he asked her to release parts of the journal when the time was right. But she now thinks that time may never come. Since his death, she says she's been asked many times by church representatives and anonymous people to see the journal or get her to hand it over. They told her it would be better for the church because it could cause confusion and pain if taken out of context, she says. But Jorge, he told me this, and now I understand what he meant. The truth will always hurt before it heals. But here's the part that really sends chills down my spine. The last entry in his journal was made just 3 days before he died. It's short, like a goodbye, but also like an alarm. If this is my last breath, let it not be in vain. The shepherd must not fear the dark, because wolves howl loudest when they sense morning. Nuria hasn't released the whole journal yet, but she has let some journalists look at some pages. One of them was Italian investigative reporter Luca Morelli, who called the writings the most damning portrait of internal Vatican resistance I've ever seen. He also says that if the journal is authenticated in its entirety, it will start debates not only within the Catholic Church, but among believers all over the world. This is where things get even more heated. Nuria says there's more than just the journal in the same wooden chest Pope Francis left behind. No one, not even Maria, knows what's inside the sealed envelope marked "Case of Betrayal." She says she has been told not to open it until she is sure it won't be destroyed or taken away. Some think it might contain audio recordings, private testimonies, or even a list of names involved in the power struggle he hinted at in his journal. And now that Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, The man Jorge once feared is becoming one of the most powerful voices in the post-Francis era. Maria is more torn than ever. She must decide whether to risk everything to share what her brother left behind, or to keep quiet and protect his image of dignity in death. This is where the story takes its most heartbreaking turn. Maria recently said that she has received messages from the families of abuse survivors pleading her to release the journal. They believe that Pope Francis may have written things that no one else was brave enough to say, and may have named priests, bishops, or even cardinals who have escaped accountability. For them, this journal is a must-read, hope, not just history. So the question now isn't whether Pope Francis was silenced or not. The question is whether his words will still be louder than the quiet he was forced to keep.